After each talk, obviously, there's a Q&A session, but sometimes you don't have enough time for asking questions, or there's like further questions down the line. So we decided to do like a fireside chat format of group Q&A, where attendees could post us questions, and then our speakers will decide among themselves who will answer the question itself. Obviously, this will be a bit difficult with all of us online, so please bear with us. Just a couple of ground rules. So we're gonna use the chat in the streaming site for the platform of the questions. It's in a first come, first served basis. And as we are limited on time, we please leave room for others. So please only ask further questions if there's any other question. And this is it. We're open for questions. Shoot. We're eagerly awaiting the questions.
I was confused by the delay when I was waiting for questions after my talk. I thought like, well, no one has questions, but it turns out they started rolling out after like 30 seconds. So
yeah, that's true. There's like a 30-second delay between like the actual live stream and the one that gets to Vimeo. We cannot hear you, Wojtek. Let me just check Slack if there are any questions. Still nothing there yet. Okay, so the first question just arrived, and we don't need to decide who answers it because it was posted straight for David. What is your favorite language feature that helped a lot during development of your game?
I didn't show that during my presentation, but it's a very simple thing. It just, the last parameter can, when it's a lambda, you don't need to add parentheses. It means nothing, but in some of my games, I'm creating a lot of small state machines. And so thanks to this feature, it's easy to write code which is quite explicit. So this is just that, because I'm just thinking about that at the moment. But I think I will keep this feature because when I start learning Kotlin, I was like, but what's the point to just get rid of parentheses when the last parameter is a lambda? But now I'm starting to understand it and I'm using it more and more.
Thank you, got it. Our next question is from János Setény, who's asking, is Kotlin better for you than Scala, and why? I'm not sure who of you uses or use Scala. I'm pretty sure Simon and Raul are or were. This is probably like a trick question.
Unless anyone else wants to answer, I've been using Scala since 2011 and Kotlin for over 3 years now. Scala and Kotlin are very different languages despite having the same or very similar syntax or some features in the surface that look the same. Scala, for example, is a language that makes more emphasis in type level features or advanced language features that allow you to do very complex things, but it also has the same succinct syntax as Kotlin. Kotlin, on the other side, makes a better work, in my opinion, in reducing some of the most common problems in programming. For example, the case of null pointer by introducing nullable types explicitly, which are not coming to Scala until Scala 3. The case of having suspend, which basically tells you that you have I/O in the environment, and it implies that then you can use a language that doesn't use wrappers and allocations. So there is so many benefits to Kotlin for being simpler. There's many benefits to Scala for being more complex at the same time, depending on the style of programming that you want to achieve. And I think the biggest difference is not so much in the languages, but in the communities. Scala community is a community that is heavily acting on the backend scene and in the big data spaces, has no traction whatsoever in front end or mobile. Even the Scala on Android attempts were not successful because Scala evolved faster in the Java versions, and that caused problems in the community. So those make the languages are really, you cannot really compare them that much because they are also heavily used in very different spaces. So now that Kotlin is coming more to backend is when there is a bigger opportunity to see what Scala has been doing in the backend wrong that Kotlin can do better. But I have to say that I equally love both languages, and I still write in both of them. I don't think, I miss features from both of them, whatever I'm in one or the other. So that's my opinion.
Thank you for your answer. Does anybody want to add their 2 cents? Or should we jump to the next question? Next question then. We had several talks about coroutines. What complementary material would you recommend besides the official documentation? This is a question from Juan Almeida.
So I want to just jump in there real quick. I think Roman Elizarov's posts on Medium are a great source if you want to get some behind the scenes looks and also just kind of some information about the design decisions that are happening in the background, as well as just an overview of the technology. So he blogs on medium.com/@Elizarov.
And also Roman's talks from KotlinConf. I remember he had one about flows last time and probably about coroutines before that. So they're really great to explain the concept in itself. But also my colleagues' talks from Android Dev Summit, from Google I/O. There's a lot of talks about how coroutines interact with other parts of your app, like live data. And we also have a lot of articles on our Medium. So there's a whole series by Sean McKillen. There's a new series of explanations by Manuel and Florina. So check out Android developers, and we have a lot of stuff there.
There's something that I would like to add there. Both mentions of references were all mentions or reference to Kotlin X coroutines. So for me, what was really, really lacking is documentation of what you find in the standard library, and especially in the intrinsics package. So for me, to build the ArrowFX coroutines library, I spend most of my time reading the Kotlin code base, understanding what happens on the different platforms. So I was really digging into the source code of the Kotlin language itself. And also reading Kotlin X coroutines library to see what they were doing under the hood. Because besides that, there is really no information at all at how you can build your own coroutines library, because everything focuses on the Kotlin X coroutine library instead of the core concept of coroutines in the language. So that was something that is extremely lacking, in my opinion.
Yeah, and also I'd like to add to what Simon said, that if you want to see a foundation of what really coroutines are, then we have to look into the limited continuations. Because coroutines are just an expression of the limited continuations expressed towards the problem of concurrency. But the limited continuations as an abstraction, it's further than that. It means that suspension overall can act over strict data types, concurrent data types, and many other places. That's why you see things like the sequence builder, which uses suspension and is not an async data type. So there is a paper called The Limited Continuation is the Mother of All Monads. and that gives you an insight into why this system can be used for much more than just concurrency frameworks and for many other purposes. But that's like the base foundation of what exists in the Kotlin compiler. It's basically translating a set of imperative instruction into a delimited continuation callback passing style. Then you, as a library, can determine what or how those functions run. And this is what Kotlin X Coroutines does, ArrayFX does, and potentially any other framework like Reactor or Rx could do as well based on the standard library.
Thank you for all the excellent answers. Our next question is about KMP. From Mario, we've seen a lot of KMP talks, but how do you feel on the adaptation of it in production? Is it ready for production on enterprise apps, not simple projects?
So just jump in there. My life now is essentially selling KMP to people. I just got off a sales call right before this. I had to leave early. So this question comes up a lot. Is KMP production ready? And it's not a binary question, but it is often expressed as thus. And I throw that back at people like, is it in production? Sure. There are a lot of significant apps that put in production, perhaps silently, like, we're working with Square. I'm not going to say what their situation is because there's NDAs and stuff. Certainly Kareem's got stuff in production. Quizlet's got, including web, Target did something. I know a bunch of other people looking at it and aggressively making that decision very soon. So people are definitely putting in production, but is it early adopter? Like, absolutely. Okay. Like there is, I am like publishing docs on how concurrency works. Why? Because the docs don't really exist. Stuff like that. The tooling is improving. There's going to be an Android Studio plugin from JetBrains to allow you to run and debug iOS apps from Android Studio. It's coming soon. We built an Xcode plugin that lets you do the same thing in Xcode with Kotlin code. And there's library work to be done. There's all kinds of stuff. The Apollo, the GraphQL, it's amazing that you folks have done that, and it's coming along. But the question is, production ready? It's kind of like, is it ready for you? Like you got to try it. Is the tooling good enough? Is it not? Then okay. If you're not an early adopter kind of team, then it's not going to work out. If you really love new stuff and you want to like have an outsized impact on an ecosystem, like now's the time. It's ready for you. But it all depends on. Try it out. Is the best way I can put it. And on the Kotlin Slack, if you can ping me directly and take up a chunk of my day. We'll have a longer talk about it.
Thank you, Kevin. Let's jump to the next question. It's from Fabian Brown. I really enjoy using HTTP 4K, especially the type safety everywhere. Dave and Ivan, can you recommend some resources on learning more on HTTP 4K's lenses and what goes on behind the scenes?
Okay, I'll take this one, I suppose, considering I'm mostly responsible. So, well, first of all, it's really great that people enjoy using it. That's the kind of best kind of feedback I think anyone can get from the user base. As for actually learning them, I think really, so the lens implementation doesn't go anywhere near as kind of far as say Haskell lens or anything like that. It's quite rudimentary. And actually, what's going on behind the scenes isn't actually that much at all. It's just function composition. So maybe the best thing to do to actually learn about how they work is just to literally just go and have a look at the source code in the repository, because it's probably, the core of it is probably about 12 lines of code, probably. It's really, really not that much. As for learning to use them, I think pretty much the tests are probably the best place to look. We have different kind of apps. There's no kind of structured material about it, I suppose, but it's mostly the tests and the source code. And if you've got any questions, just jump into the HTTP Slack channel, and we're always in there. So just get us, just ask us, please. There's one other one for native actually there, HTTP native. I'll just jump in onto that as well. It has been mentioned we could do a native version. At the moment, we're currently bound to some of the JVM libraries because of the things just don't exist. So like the datetime library doesn't exist. There's no cross-platform IO library that is kind of stable that we know of that we would work. I could be wrong with that. It's been a while since we looked at it, but it has been mentioned, but we haven't got around to it. Too busy doing other things, I think.
Thank you, David, for the answer, and also for answering the HTTP 4K native question. The next question is from M. Bonin. I'm guessing this is Martin Bonin. If you had to change one thing in Kotlin or the Kotlin ecosystem, what would it be? I think we can take rounds here. If anybody has anything to add, feel free.
I have an idea. Probably it's the same one that Simon has, but I would like to see cancellation support in the standard library intrinsics for the suspense system, because that will give us transparent interop between concurrent libraries that have different cancellation mechanisms today in Kotlin, which is happening with Kotlin X Coroutines as a way. We have a different way. RX, others have a different way. So moving this to the standard library will be a fair game for all the community. And the other one is like that I know the Kotlin compiler team is already working on, but I'm looking forward to seeing better support for compiler plugins with a more stable API and documentation. But that I know it's gonna happen at some point. So it's not a complaint, more of a wish for it to happen soon.
I just want to throw in a second, like the whole native community is like, let's get that compiler plugin stuff working yesterday. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes.
In the standard library, could we get a proper either type, please? That would be lovely.
Also, they're building a date time library, but the question mark is when, and that would be sweet. I tried to convert Java time to Kotlin, and it ran, and then I gave up because I'm like, this is too much work. So.
Have another one. Since many people use a functional style with Kotlin, many people tend to use the operators in the collections library as if those collections were truly persistent immutable, but that's not the case. So we would like to see support for true persistent collections in Kotlin coming in the standard library so that we can really rely on immutable data structures instead of just the read-only facades over the Java APIs, which are great, no complaint about that. It's just not a persistent collection implementation, and the style sometimes has a penalty because of that.
So yeah, maybe to also come back to the previous Scala question, and then a feature that I would love having in Kotlin, it recently received a keep. I am absolutely missing pattern matching in Kotlin, which is one of my favorite features in Scala because it can make your code look so much more concise in a lot of cases. You can also make it look horrible in some cases, but you can always write horrible code. So, and then, the collections that we have in Scala are so much more rich than what we have in Kotlin today. So sometimes I do miss some of the collection APIs that I was able to use in Scala that I am missing in Kotlin today.
Got it. Thank you. If nobody has anything else to add, then let's jump to the next question. Of course, if anything else pops into your mind during other questions, feel free to jump back to this one. So the next question was Fu's question about HTTP 4K going native. That was already answered by David. Let's jump to Kyoba's question. What is your opinion on the keep proposals? Are we going to see proposals accepted after 1.4 has been released?
I truly don't understand the keep proposal. We plan on keep sending keeps, nonetheless, for all the type system features we demonstrated, because we're not trying to compete with the compiler, so just like showing what's possible. So in that regards, we are gonna send like 4 or 5 keeps in 2020. Now, how that gets to materialization in the language, I don't think there is a a standard community process or anything like that. It's more of a kind of mailbox of suggestion, and then people that are behind the compiler maintenance or in that team decide based on priorities, which makes perfect sense, right? So that's like what the KEEP proposal seems to look like. Then there are some KEEPs that are highly controversial, like the one we sent for type classes. That is the one that has been having the most run and spoken about, and never came to any official conclusion whether it was going to be considered or not. There is others that just run through with 5 lines of text. So very simple features. So it's hard to, at least for me as a community member, to really understand whether the KEEP proposal is relevant or not. But since it's the only thing we have at the moment, I think this is what we are following in the hopes that this process will improve and get more, streamlined in the future as the compiler and the language becomes more stable.
I think from my side, it's really difficult to respond to this question without being on the JetBrains team who work on these things. And I know, for example, that for 1.4 and even 4.1.5, there are several big rewrites of compilers happening to make them faster and to work better with native. And so my guess is that that's the priority for the team. But again, it's weird speaking, for someone and not really knowing that. So my guess is, maybe at some point the KEEP proposals will get more attention, but there are priorities right now that just need to stabilize certain things in the language and in the compiler that probably need to happen first.
I think that makes perfect sense. Thank you, both of you, for your answers. Let's jump to the next question. It's from Diego. It's aimed at Kevin, but I think anybody who uses multi-platform is free to answer. So Kevin, do you use any dependency injection for KMP?
Well, I'll start that with dependency injection is everyone's favorite argument online. So first, what is dependency injection and what counts? So there's no Dagger, so that's out. Essentially, right now there was Codeine, which had native support, and I added native support to Coin and JS support to Coin, and that's in sort of a testing phase right now. You can go use that. We use that. The only reason I actually chatted with Arno today, oddly enough, but he's the author of Coin. But I wanted to add specific support to native so that it is enforcing the native concurrency policy, and there's a compatibility mode that will run on Android that will enforce sort of the same rules as far as injection. Codeine, if you prefer Codeine syntax, will work fine. Just be, I think, a little more careful. You might auto freeze the whole runtime, so just be aware of that. But those are basically the two options, and we use Coin. So.
I can add one thing. So Dagger is currently not an option, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, because there is no way of basically running the annotation processing on the shared code, right? And generating it on native.
There's no elegant way. There is a couple of workarounds, but I don't think it would be palatable to
Yeah. So I just wanted to plug one thing. We were supposed to have this beta launch event this week. It unfortunately got postponed. However, watch our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. There will be a State of Kotlin video by my colleague Jeffrey Van Gough, and he'll be announcing something that might in the future come in handy for this. I'm not saying it'll not be support for Dagger and Kotlin multi-platform, anything like that. However, please watch it if you're interested in tools that might help this space in the future. So I can't, unfortunately, say much more right now. You'll have to just wait for the video.
Additionally, I would like to point out that there is intentions in the Kotlin compiler in the future potentially to support ad hoc polymorphism, which basically implies type classes. And in that event, injections are automatic. So when the compiler, if ever, does support this, or if you're using one of the arrow Plugins like Given, which supports implicit resolution, basically the compiler can wire all of the transformations in the graph without generating Java stubs, without using cat, just basically instrumenting the IR tree before it goes to a platform and injecting the functions at compile time. So that could be an option in the future, and that's one of the reasons talking about Scala. Why nobody in Scala uses DI frameworks? Well, the compiler basically does DI for you. So if this is a problem that everyone is having, I expect the JetBrains team and the Kotlin team to do something similar to what they've done with I/O and nullability, which is acknowledge this is a problem, let's fix it once and for all for everyone. And potentially, hopefully, dependency injection can come to the compiler. Additionally, if someone is interested in this topic today in the current state of Kotlin, dependency injection with the compiler is possible today using receiver functions and type arguments. I have a couple of these that I can share later for the YouTube description if anyone is interested, where it shows that you can use the Kotlin compiler to wire an entire application without any libraries or frameworks.
Just one thing that I want to quickly reiterate from our talk is that the given annotation only allows one instance per type. So it comes with the same limitation of a dagger in contrast to Scala, where you could have multiple instances per type. So in this case, you're still guaranteed that you will always get a singleton type that you expect and not depending on what scope you are in.
Thank you for the excellent answers and also for the sneak peek, Wojtek. Looking forward to that video. Let's jump to the next question. It's from Mario and it is targeted at the Arrow team. The FX coroutines look really promising, and I was glad to see it as I/O was personally discouraging me from using it because of its syntax and lookalike to RX. When should we wait for FX coroutines to be released?
I'm sorry, you cut away for a second. Can you repeat the question?
Of course. So the FX coroutines look really promising, and I was glad to see it, as I/O was personally discouraging me from using it because of its syntax and lookalike to RX. When should we wait for FX coroutines to be released?
Okay, so the current plan for Arrow and Arrow FX is to enable all the syntax that you saw today in the presentation. There is currently already a roadmap for Arrow Core, and next week we will release the roadmap for Arrow FX for this to be released. But this is to be released over the summer, since all the work for Arrow FX coroutines is already done. So what is left is, adding some more documentation and polishing up the libraries for release. So this should be coming up soon.
Awesome, thank you.
And this snapshot will be available by next week.
Even more awesome, thank you. Next question, multi-platform questions. Why Kotlin? Okay, so the first question is Kotlin vs Flutter Dart or React Native? Anybody does have an opinion?
I have a lot of opinions, but
yeah, trick question.
I'll keep it real short. Anybody that's a native mobile developer tends to look at anything that's not native as cross-platform and put it in the same bucket. All these things are like React Native and Flutter are somewhat similar. Kotlin multi-platform and the rest of these things is entirely different, right? It focused on an entirely separate thing. So inevitably it's a this versus that, but I don't look at them as remotely similar. Why not Flutter for us? Because you kind of have to make a big decision and re-implement a bunch of your stuff. We're talking to teams who want to integrate shared logic in an incremental way without taking big risks. And Kotlin's fun, and it integrates with the native platform very smoothly, relatively. An iOS developer would complain that it's not Swift, and that's true. That's it. Anybody else?
Well, maybe just a quick comment there. From experience, I've been working as an Android developer before I joined 47 Degrees, and I've worked with both Android and Flutter. And I think Flutter was amazing for small applications that didn't require a lot of complex native features or had to integrate with a lot of native components on iOS or Android or other platforms. So for those cases, but this has been like 1 year and a half ago when the first beta from Flutter was released. Then those cases, Flutter work perfectly for small use cases. But like you already mentioned, Kotlin native, in my opinion, is a completely different game, where you would be able to share code across backends and different teams and iOS. So in my opinion, they serve completely different use cases. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve, in my opinion.
Thank you. Next question. How would you recommend building Kotlin native skills in a team having iOS and Android native devs? What are the steps, phases, documents to start with?
I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but like this is also the other thing I was just talking about on the sales meeting. So I think there's like the people aspect first, right? This is inevitably going to feel like an Android thing coming in and taking over your iOS thing. So you have to like pump the brakes. You know, the first thing you really should do is find people on the iOS team who are curious about this to check it out. The good thing is that Kotlin can be introduced in an incremental way. So pick something everyone hates or doesn't get a lot of joy out of, right? So I haven't found a lot of people like core data. I just haven't. So starting with maybe with SQLite as a shared module is something you can try out. A lot of larger teams are actually looking at things like analytics. They're things that are difficult to get precise and you need them to be precise. And most developers don't get a lot of joy out of writing analytics because you don't see the outcome. So sharing that code with a typed analytic library is something good. We make an Xcode plugin for Kotlin so you can debug Kotlin visually. Our kind of advice is like, the people who want to at least see the Kotlin, install that tool. You don't necessarily have to learn Kotlin, but being able to see it and debug it is a good way to start getting exposed to it without having to jump in with both feet. And then try to teach your team like it's not, I usually try to not say iOS developers and Android developers, but say iOS leaning developers and start talking more about mobile developers. And then one team we talked to was great. Like the first time you commit something to the shared code, you get like a gift and like some kind of award thing, like a mug or something, you know, like the little things like that. So we have a doc called CampKit, which is a getting started thing. We have an article coming out from our iOS focused multi-platform dev that's like, hey, for an iOS dev, here's how you get started. That'll be sometime the next week, I think. But it's more about finding people who are curious and want to check it out. And also don't come in steamrolling like, hey, we're going to take all your code away. Nobody likes that. So.
I want to just add, I completely agree with the Kevin comment that so there are like two problems here. The first is the tooling. So we need to continue improve tooling for Kotlin native, and that will grow the confidence from the iOS developer that the tooling is ready, that is production ready. And the second part is obviously people. So unfortunately, sometimes it's a people problem that blocks any kind of cross-platform. And the tricky question about the React Native, Flutter, or like the Kotlin native, it's all depends. It's a tooling, so you need to pick the right tooling for particular problem. So, and even like crazy at Shopify, for example, we are doing even more thinking about this crazy part is that when we're going to have React Native and Kotlin native. And Kotlin native is the use for our internal SDKs, native SDKs for example, to work with the card readers. So obviously that must be platform, but we don't want to write that twice for iOS and Android. So that way we can actually really utilize the Kotlin native and use that and share the same business logic related to card reader. And as for React Native, it's going to be just UI that is cross-platform.
Thank you for the great answers. Let's jump to the next question. We still have some time left. So Janos Chetény's question is, what are the common pitfalls with coroutines? Does anybody want to jump on it?
I'll throw out one, and Roman actually does a piece on this in the Medium post, which are excellent. It was a great suggestion to everybody that said that. Being in coroutines doesn't mean that you aren't still subject to the same concurrency rules and concurrency pitfalls. So if you start referring to shared data in your JVM, Kotlin native won't let you do this, of course. If you start mutating shared data without the proper controls, just because you're in coroutines doesn't mean you're safe. So it's very important to understand that, I think.
Right. Maybe it's something else I wanted to add there, and it's also something that I mentioned during the talk, is, for example, if you're running coroutines on an IO pool, you're still actually creating new threads in that IO pool. So, if there's always a given impression that you can run as many coroutines as you want, but if every coroutine is running on an independent IO pool context, you're still bound to go out of memory because you created too many threads. Right? In comparison, if you do this on a computation pool, there will be thread switching, but that's not the case for IO. So if you're running too many IO coroutines in too many IO contexts, it will still blow up your application. So you're still bound to the concurrency rules of the GVM.
I think I have one that oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to throw in one as an educator. I would say probably the biggest beginner mistake you can make with coroutines is reading too many tutorials and coroutines, because it's in the nature of coroutines that 10 different experts can explain it in 10 different ways. And if you're me anyway, you can get completely befuddled. So I would say pick a good introduction, like some of the ones that have been recommended, and then pick a problem, and just go and start writing code and try and understand it that way. And only whenever you've kind of grappled with it yourself and got a firm foundation, then try and expand your reading out from there.
So Garth, are you saying that like Scala's Vietnam is Monad tutorials, coroutine tutorials are Kotlin's Vietnam?
Well,
I think what Garth is saying is that coroutines are monads.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I've got a lot of Android folks I work with, and they explain it one way. And then my colleague Eamon has like a very low-level background, so he disassembled the bytecode and came up to me and went, "It's just a state machine. It's just a state machine," And then you get people from AFP theoretical background; they'll explain it a different way, and so on. So yeah, like monads, you can suffer from a kind of embarrassment of riches, and everybody wants to explain it in their own particular way. So I would say find a couple of good introductions and then find your own explanation. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I had one pitfall that I've actually seen from a few people stumble upon completely independently of each other, and that is how to actually use supervisor scope and pass it in a correct way so that you actually get coroutines or jobs that can run independently of each other and not cancel each other. So I think one of Manuel's articles on cancellation talks about this. Basically, there is a way to shoot yourself in the foot, and you think you're using a supervisor scope for a few jobs, but you're actually not, because there's another job in between created for you. And so if one job cancels or errors out, then the others will too. And so you need to be really careful where and how you're actually passing that supervisor scope. So again, read Manuel's articles. It might be useful. So tricky things around cancellation and errors, basically.
I wanted to throw in just one simple kind of basic thing real quick. So just to make sure that any suspending functions you're writing will suspend the caller thread, so that you don't end up with blocking functions which are marked with suspend and confuse people. So holding up contracts and conventions like that is quite important. And if your code is complex enough, then it might not be trivial to notice if you're not doing that correctly.
Thank you. This was all great advice. And we still have time for one final question, and I think we found the perfect one from Jan Lund. How do you balance open source Kotlin project work with delivering features to customers' products? Or do you mainly work with open source? And I think this is a question for basically everyone. So please take rounds, everybody who wants to contribute.
Mine's easy. I managed to slowly work myself out of my day-to-day business. So now I mostly basically do open source full time. But hopefully that changes when we get new clients. So we'll see how it goes.
So yeah, my story is quite similar. So I've been working on Arrow now for 3 years. In the first 2 years, that was the nights after work and during the weekends and during personal holidays. But luckily enough, 47 Degrees has now hired me to work full time on Arrow. So that is great. I was also able to turn that into my day-to-day job to help the Kotlin community.
From my
So-
side, sorry, go ahead.
So I'm super happy that I don't actually have customers or paying clients that I have to deliver a product to. So my job is literally just making the ecosystem better for developers. So if there's a contribution I can do to open source, then that's what I'm going to do. So I'm super happy because of that.
I think it really helps to be able to solve a problem that that is there for something that needs to be solved. So in our scenario, what we were doing is actually we were ripping out a DI system, which is how we came up with kind of porting what was a Scala framework into Kotlin. I think lots of, I think obviously at the start, it kind of really it does require potentially a load of personal time. And then it's weird because all the support stuff kind of takes over as well. But then, for instance, the moment we're building a bank with Kotlin, with HTTP, so that's all great. So that kind of drives other things. So I don't know, it is tricky, but yeah, it would be nice if more kind of clients or companies kind of put, they do take a lot of open source, they use a lot of open source. It would be really great if they actually kind of fed back the amount of value they actually get, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to encourage everyone to actually do that, because really, in my case, or in the case of 47 Degrees, or involvement with open source is related to being part of the communities from which, of course, we also get employees, we get interactions with other companies, and building the tooling for the community that you are part on. It's important if you have an investment on that language. And I think every company should understand and dedicate something or somewhat to that if possible, because at the end of the day, there is opportunity for all of us to build libraries and build things in Kotlin and other languages too that are open source, and that our companies can also profit from in many different ways, not just in terms of money, but also like in the long-term maintenance, in the interest of other people that help refine your original ideas that you thought it were great, but they're actually not that great once you have a team of 100 people that have looked into what you've done. And those kinds of opportunities only come through open source. So I would like to encourage everyone that has a stake in Kotlin to also have a stake in the community and get involved with what's going on with everyone's libraries.
Thank you all. I think these were excellent closing words to the Fireside Chat, and thanks again for your participation in the Fireside Chat. Also, thank you for the awesome questions. We ran out of time, so this brings us to the end of Kotliners 2020, the first fully online Kotliners conference. I would like to say thank you again to all of our speakers. We heard and saw excellent talks throughout the day. All of the talks will be published, first available for the attendees, and then soon available for the larger public. Again, it was an absolute pleasure having all of you here today. Also, I wanted to thank again JetBrains and Google for all their help and effort, and of course also to our partners and everybody at Makery. And last but not least, all of you for attending the conference. You keep this community alive. Thank you, and we hope you had a lot of fun, learned a lot, and maybe met some new friends along the way. We really hope to see all of you here again next year. So again, thank you for being here, and have a nice evening. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.